Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I'm glad you joined me for this last message in my series on the ending in Isaiah. I really had an interesting idea on this one. I've entitled it "Viper's Eggs Don't Make a Good Omelet," and it's taken from Isaiah chapter 59, beginning in verse 4 and going through verse 8, and also 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 8 through 11. I thought about how evil impacts our lives. One of the things that Isaiah is dealing with is he has lived through 5 different kings. His grandfather, probably his grandfather, Uzziah, and his calling in the first part of Isaiah that we find in Isaiah chapter 6, probably when he was around 16 years of age. He follows through with King Jotham, Uzziah's son, and probably his cousin Ahaz, who is the next king and who is a king that turns away from God and becomes apostate. He then experiences the reign of Hezekiah, who is a righteous king and really does a lot to honor God and honor God's purpose in life. But Hezekiah even has his Achilles heel or his failings as a king, and his lack of interest in what's going to happen in the future disturbs Isaiah, and that's really what seems to kick off this last section of the book of Isaiah, beginning in chapter 40. But Hezekiah is followed by his young son, Manasseh, who comes to the throne when he's 12 years old. It appears from the chronology of the Bible that possibly Manasseh was co-regent with his father Hezekiah for the last 10 years of Hezekiah's life. We don't know that for sure, but it is very possible that happened. And Isaiah probably watched as Manasseh deteriorated as a ruler and began to become more and more headstrong and more aimed at his own purposes and his own devices. When his father died, Isaiah was probably in his early 70s. And so he is experiencing all of this sudden change because Manasseh decides to go his own way, to seek his own desires. And we are told that he turned toward evil in a way that Judah had not experienced before. In fact, the writers of Chronicles and also the writers in Kings talk about him doing evil that had not been done in Judah's history. In fact, you had to go back before Israel's history to the time of the Canaanites to find the kind of evil in the land that Manasseh practiced. And we are told some of those evil things. We're told that he was a man who committed himself to astrology and witchcraft and all kinds of other evil. But he also practiced human sacrifice, and the worst kind. It says that he destroyed his own sons in the fire. And that was one of the Canaanite practices that had taken place before the Israelites had come into Canaan. They had sacrificed their own children in immolation, and that was a terrible, terrible thing. And so God had brought judgment on the Canaanites for that. But now here was this man, Manasseh, the king of Judah, and he is starting to do these very things. And we're told that it was because he was pursuing particularly a type of what's called necromancy, the idea of trying to communicate with the dead, trying to get some type of power and magic from the dead. There is a very interesting statement in this chapter where Isaiah talks about the people of Judah who have, he will talk about them making a covenant with death in this part of Isaiah. But he also talks in this particular chapter about them collecting, as it were, viper eggs and uh, and bringing them to fruition only to try and eat them, and finding out that the poison of the viper has, as the young vipers are going down their throat, they bite them in the tongue and the throat. Or they find out how really terrible it is, and so they try and stamp on these eggs. And what happens is these young vipers come out of their eggs and bite them in the ankles. And he also compares it to the idea of spiders trying to gather spider webs and use them as clothing to hide. And he uses a particular term for embroidery in verse 6 of chapter 59, and talks about them trying to cover up the evil in their lives by trying to make it look beautiful by covering with embroidered colors of spider webs and embroidering other things into it to try and hide the evil intent and hide the evil purpose. We are told that Manasseh led the people of Judah. Not only did he sacrifice his sons in the fires of immolation, but he taught the people of Judah to do the same in their worship. And they began worshiping chthonic spirits. Chthonic spirits are those spirits of the underworld, of death and chaos. And so you find them wrapping themselves up in this chaotic religion that worships evil, as it were, and draws them deeper and deeper into this abyss in their lives. And you feel Isaiah's struggle, his frustration, his anger as he sees justice cast down in the street and truth treated as if it were a lie, and uprightness and integrity treated with complete contempt. In fact, he says those who try and live uprightly and live with integrity become nothing more than a target for those who are evil. And you feel this despair that Isaiah has toward what's happening in his culture. And it seems like there's no hope in the midst of this. And I think that's one of the powerful things about this chapter, is that Isaiah comes to the end of this chapter and talks about God's power, that God is tired of the injustice and he will strap on his armor and approach the injustice and deal with it. And yet he is also a God who offers grace and mercy in the midst of this circumstance. And that's a wonderful and powerful truth that we find in this particular chapter. As I was reading it, I was thinking about the promise of Christ's return, when he will strap on his armor, as it were, and step into this world once again and bring justice and righteousness by his own power and by his own might. But up until then, God is offering an opportunity of repentance and restoration. According to Jewish tradition, King Manasseh had Isaiah executed. In fact, we are told in the Bible that he killed many of the prophets and many of the righteous nobles in Judah as he pursued his determined evil. But there came a day when that changed, when this covenant with death that Manasseh had made was flipped on its head, and he suddenly became the object of that destruction. For we are told that the Assyrian king, and that's probably Ashurbanipal, who was the last great king of the Assyrians came and took him with hooks, it says, and drew him to the land of Assyria, and there judged him, and he was in fear of his life, and he finally turned to God and repented. And it says God relented and returned him to his kingship in Judah. The problem is there was already a mess, and God had already determined that because the Jewish people had turned toward the evil of Manasseh, that his judgment would come on the land of Judah. It's a terrible thing when people have gone past the point of no return. But God still offers grace even in those moments, because Manasseh received God's grace. And that is a wonderful, wonderful truth. Manasseh tried to undo the damage that he had done. And while he couldn't undo it, his grandson Josiah would bring righteousness again and prepare the people for the exile that was coming. Christ offers us grace even in the darkest times. Even when it seems like there is no hope, there is still God's grace. Isaiah believed that, and Manasseh experienced that. And you can as well. God's grace is there for you if you're willing to receive it and admit that you need it, that you're a sinner and need his grace. I hope to see you in church. God's blessings on you. Have a great week. Take care.